Welcome, everybody. I want to especially welcome anyone who is here for the first time, and thank you for joining us. I know Michael has a huge following on Twitter and Instagram, and I want to welcome you to A Deeper South. And if you haven't been here before, I want to just tell you a little bit about what we do. My name is Pete Candler. I'm a writer and photographer at A Deeper South, which is a storytelling project in word and image about memory and amnesia in the American South. The vision of A Deeper South is rooted in the idea that the spiritual, political, and cultural health of a nation, region, city, town, or person depends upon an honest and unflinching memory. That the gravest danger to our cities and ourselves is a willful amnesia. And that hope is to be found through the work of active remembrance, putting back together the fragments of personhood scattered by a culture of selective memory. Having read that, any of you who are familiar with Michael Twitty's work will know immediately why I wanted to have him sit down with us for a little bit in this context. Michael is a culinary historian, a historic interpreter, and food writer based in the Washington D.C. area. He is the author of the James Beard Award-winning The Cooking Gene, which came out a few years ago. And if you haven't read it, I cannot encourage you strongly enough to buy a copy and read it as soon as you can. It's an incredibly powerful work. And it's been personally very important to me and very important to the whole Deeper South journey, which we'll maybe get into a little bit later. But I wanted to start with another item that Michael and I have in common, and that is a kind of love for road trips, at least in part. In 2012, correct me if I get some of these details wrong, Michael, and let me just officially welcome you and say how glad I am to be sitting down. Well, I'm actually standing, but to be in this virtual room together. We were supposed to get together a couple years ago, maybe when Michael was giving a presentation here in Asheville. It didn't work out, but here we are, and I'm really so thrilled to have you. In 2012, you began as a kind of, I think it was part road trip, maybe part plane trip, a sort of journey across the Southeast that you called the Southern Discomfort Tour.
Yeah.
And it involved you doing some of your historic interpretive work, which is essentially cooking using the tools, recipes, ingredients, even clothes that enslaved people would have worn and used, and in the conditions they would have cooked in during slavery. And I've got a passage here that is from The Cooking Gene that really struck me, because I think it connects with so much of what we've been talking about here with regard to memory and amnesia. You talk about going around the Southeast. As on page 11, you write, my Southern credentials once came from rattling off home places in my presentations, as if I had been to all of them, seen the counties and creeks and courthouses. Some I had, some I had not. Phoenix City and Seal, Alabama, Prospect, Virginia, Lancaster, South Carolina, Halifax County, North Carolina, Athens, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, New Orleans. The list kept getting longer and longer as I added up all the spots and stops that led to me. crumbling kitchens, rotting auction blocks, graveyards iced in asphalt. With each deterioration, I was becoming someone fading from who I was and where I came from, just in time for the rest of the world to catch amnesia with me. Could you talk a little bit about, I mean, the cooking gene starts with this sense of being sort of disassembled, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's a work of kind of putting yourself back together. Can you talk a little bit more about this moment when you felt like you had become someone fading from who you were?
Yeah, because I started having, really have sort of like a personal sense of amnesia. And I realized that, you know how we used to be able to rattle off hundreds of phone numbers. And then the minute cell phones became a thing, it was like we lost the ability to remember that information. And of course, with those numbers came emotional baggage, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a moment in the grocery store, because you know how you have those ridiculous, bonus cards, etc. And the one that I remember was my late mother's. And at one time I forgot it. And it wasn't just, oh, wow, I forgot the number for the bonus card. It was, oh God, I'm forgetting my mother. Okay. When that phone number comes up on the phone and you go, oh, I can't wait to talk to her, or not right now, mom, or, whatever. All those feelings came flooding back. And that's sort of what I experienced. I think that there is a very Confederate identity about the South. It's unfortunate because that identity locks out everybody but like the two black guys who were in the Sons of the Confederate, the Sons of the Confederacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't include millions of us, and even more millions upon millions of us that are not born within the boundaries of what most people, not all, most people accept as the South, which is pretty much the CSA. And we could probably add on Kentucky. We can debate other places, but that's pretty much what they think of. And that's pretty wrong, because most of us are asked the question, we'll ask a question of each other. We'll be like, where are your people from? Where your people from does not mean how long have you been on the South Side. It does not mean how long have you been in West Philly. It does not mean how long have you been in Prospect Park, or even in the Bay Area, in Oakland, or in Fillmore. What it means is, where are your people from in the South, in the homeland? I can tell a lot about you from that one question. And then I'll start asking questions like, okay, what's your people's names? And then within a couple of minutes, most people who are very into that and very familiar will pick out a person, and the words will come out, we're probably related. Right? That's internally Black. But because of this project, I have the other experience, which is you know who is a well-meaning white person from the South and who is not by the phrase, if that comes out of their mouth first, we're probably related. With the understanding that there's some trauma and some turmoil in that, but a tacit acknowledgement that we are a part of each other, right? But for me personally, it was just like, you're not supposed to remember these bad places, right? These places of destruction, of amnesia. And what I would explain it this way. I get really, I hate to dive in so deep so quickly, but I think people tend to forget that our culture was beat out of us. And so there's this horrifying juxtaposition of a Yankee copperhead president talking about our monuments, as if he damn well knew what those were. But there's people coming over from Germany and Sweden and some nonsense. you know, to Ellis Island, our monuments. And so then, you know, this horrifying thing where the Confederacy, as symbol of the defense of slavery, state rebellion against the government, and removal from the American dream, is a stand-in for whiteness. And furthermore, the idea that, oh my God, the Confederate records are burning, the flag is burning, but nobody seems to give a damn about the 70,000 years of sustained cultural existence that West Africans had that burned to the ground from Quebec to Rio de Janeiro and beyond, to Buenos Aires. And they don't care because we were savages, right? We were heathens. You know, that whole thing in Philly where the bros are attacking the liberal journalist, beating him up. And as he protests that Columbus is not a good role model, one of the men shouts, "They were savages back then." Now, nobody is brave enough anymore, except for Black people who have lost their damn minds, to say that nonsense. As, you know, one of the local officials in Florida did one time. She says, "I don't want to be African because if I was back in Africa, I'd be worshiping trees and running around naked and beating on bongo." Some horrifying things she learned from Tarzan, no doubt. But that's what it takes to learn about yourself. As a Black person, it is not nice to skip on back. Zippity doo dah, zippity a. It is not nice. And I am, I feel like I know what the King generation felt towards the generation that came after them. Because this is like the King generation was like, well, we can settle this, we can do this, we can be in peace. And then the result was anger and Sturm und Drang, but they didn't know what was coming next after he got shot. Which I'm down for because I'm a child of that. My parents were that generation, right? But what I'm getting at is that to be an African American, to be a Black American in this country, 90% of us have our roots in the American South. 90%. And then we've in successive waves left and come back to the South almost like a tide, right? I was starting to forget everything. Places, names. I realized that I could tell you a name of a town or a county, but I had never actually seen the place, where the history went down. There were so many things I did not know and couldn't conceive of. And that really hurt. And I realized that I was doing it to protect myself from something painful. And I wasn't being, vulnerable enough. At that stage of my life, on the verge of 40, I wasn't being vulnerable enough. I really wasn't coming into conflict with those things which make it difficult to be Black in this country and Black in this world. And then the other part of it was that I was writing about heritage and preserving your food and preserving the culture of your food, the history of your food. But I had my own terroir. I had my own, foodscape. And I realized that there were little bits of that in Edna Lewis, may she rest in power and peace, and other people's work. But, I kind of wanted to make something. One of my friends, Therese Nelson, incredible chef and voice in our Black food community, said, we need a blueprint. She says, I need a blueprint of how I get back to Latta, South Carolina, from New Jersey, from New York. And that's what really got to me. And I actually wrote that into the book, that, I wanted this to be a blueprint for African Americans to find their way back to the South. Ultimately, when I met August Wilson, the great playwright, when I was 18, he told me, I asked him the question one-on-one, just me and him, which, you never get opportunities like that in life, right? When you meet somebody famous. And I asked him, what do I need to do with my writing with myself? And he said to me, point blank, you need to go back to the South and find Africa through your grandmother. And I didn't realize, I'm not kidding you when I tell you that I didn't even think about that until maybe a year and a half after the book was done. and I saw one of the plays he autographed for me up on the shelf, and I pulled it down, and I remembered that, and it was really it was something, right? Because he was from Pittsburgh. He never lived in the South. He'd been there, but he never got to Africa. But his whole writing was about that search for, memory, right? The piano lesson, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Gem of the Ocean, and so many other of his works are either about memory or the Black search for liberation. And that, and James Baldwin, and Romare Bearden, Alex Haley, Malcolm X, all influenced the mental material that I had going into this. But at the same time, I have to confess that, and far in the back row, whispering is Eudora Welty, is William Faulkner, the problematic Carson McCullers, and so many other people who, that was not common. That was not common for a black kid who was not going for an MA in English to have all those books. I read all of them. Absalom, As I Lay Dying, all of them. Sound the Fury. I mean, I read every single one, trying to understand what I was about. And the only words that I remember are, and Dilsey she endured. Yeah.
I don't know that I've heard you talk about Faulkner before. And he's been he's one of those voices I kind of have in my brain too. Did you just discover, or not discover, but did you start reading Faulkner just because it was part of the literary landscape? You didn't, because I have the opposite experience. Like, I was taught Faulkner in high school, or at least maybe in my freshman year of college. But James Baldwin, I'd never heard James Baldwin's name mentioned.
Wow.
Throughout, until I was I may have heard his name, but I certainly was never required to read his books until I was probably about the same age with it. I mean, I also had this kind of crisis around the age of 42 where I felt like I had to start putting pieces back together. So I mean, you described it being unusual for, a young Black person to read Eudora Welty and William Faulkner and Carson McCullers and others. How did you, what was that like? Like, is Faulkner's voice still one of those that you wrestle with or against?
Yeah, because, he's, and I didn't learn this, and I got to tell you, apart from, no, I'll be real with you. I don't think some of these books were part of the curriculum, but it's interesting that in my class, like the AP English and, honors English, they weren't read. The books that had any sort of struggle, even though they were really good, strong books, I had to actually ask my teacher, can I just borrow the copies of the books we weren't reading? And I said, what is this book about? Mainly because I saw a Black person in the art and the cover. But even before that, when I was 12, 13, I was reading Faulkner. And 13, 14, 14, because I had earned, this is very funny, I'll never let him forget this. Bill Ferris had published the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture. I was 13 at the time. And I was so excited about it. But my mother, George Patton, would not allow me to just, even if it was like really, really fun, I couldn't get it unless it was intellectual. I couldn't get it unless I earned it. So the book at that point was $100. Now you can buy it for nothing used, right? But it was $100. I still have my copy, raggedy copy, huge book. And I never mentioned it in the cooking gene. It's kind of, I wish I had now that you speak of it. And I remember reading, and I said, okay, I got to read this guy Faulkner, because Faulkner, whose name I had heard, you know, we learned him as like the Shakespeare of the South. No one will ever write as good as Faulkner about the South, or longer sentences, you know, palpable, tangible, you know, decay and Yakna Potiphar and all of it, right? And in a whole world of semi, you know, just two toes in the magical realism. And then, of course, that there was that, and that led me to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and then I wound back to Toni Morrison, right? So the language in my book comes from all of that. It comes from this sort of like crossroads of trying to deal with what the South is, and the bare poetry that's right there in front of you. You don't have to make it up. It's right there in front of you. And I dreamed of this. I mean, I gotta tell you, when my grandmother passed away, of blessed memory, I I was an ambitious little shit, because I just knew I was gonna write this huge book about the South. Somewhere in my paperwork is this collection of, like, you know, wide rule, you know, elementary school-esque paper with my little notes on it for when I was 11, 12, and 13. And I swear to God, I was going to write a book about our family history. I was going to write a book about the South. I was going to write a book that told my grandmother's stories. I was going to write a book that told my daddy's stories. I'll write a book with my mama's recipes in them. And it took time and pressure, just like a diamond, to come up with this. And for me, I actually tell college students all the time, I said, I know that you want to just burst into the scene with all the fervor and energy that you have, but sometimes you will look back and see that you really did have to take those first steps to really, as long as you possibly can, because life is short, to push something out of your being that really reflects all those. And I didn't think about that when I was writing it. I didn't think about, oh, wow, this is so miraculous. I'm living up to my destiny, my dreams, my hopes when I was younger, things that I always hoped I could show. No, I didn't think about it at all. All I could think about was putting that book out so that my advance didn't get rejected, taken back. You know, it's work at that point. It's no longer, you know, fun and fantasy. So that's where all that comes in. I mean, I still have those books, and there used to be a, you know, humongous, very well stocked used bookstore not very far from where I grew up, and I would go in there, and I'm not kidding you, with books to trade and rolls of pennies to get that $3 copy of The Sound and the Fury and Maya Angelou and Armistead Maupin. And for me, even reading authors like Armistead Maupin, who were Southern expats, was important, because I wanted to really understand how that played a role in their writing. So, you know, in Tales of the City, Michael Tolliver is the expat from the South who represents Armistead Maupin as a new native San Franciscan. So I had to read books like that to show me a little bit more about what it meant to come round and come home.
I have like a kind of negative image, like a film. I mean, that's my medium. So it's like I have a kind of negative image version of that, which was, and to go back to your point about amnesia and like the books that we did or did not grow up with. Baldwin was not, you know, fortunately I discovered him when I was old enough to kind of really wrestle with it. If it was assigned in ninth grade, I might have just, I don't know, who knows. But in my high school, which was a top private school in Atlanta, you know, and we would do, I don't remind me to come back to Atlanta as like the most quintessentially American city in the country because of its like talent for amnesia. But we took a field trip almost, I mean, it was a yearly thing, but it was a regular stop on the field trip circuit in like junior high, maybe elementary or junior high school, to the west end of Atlanta, to the Wren's Nest, the home of Joel Chandler Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Harris, Harris actually has, we talked a little bit before about Sam Hose. He's got a connection to Du Bois, because Du Bois was on his way to visit Joel Chandler Harris at the Atlanta Constitution when he saw Hose's knuckles in the shop. But all of that history was redacted, so to speak. Right. So we go to this, the West End is a historically African American part of Atlanta. Like, it's the home of the Black middle class in Atlanta's history. And Harris's home is right there. And of course, he's famous for taking these stories he learned from enslaved people on Turnwald Plantation near Eatonton and transmitting them. Of course, he's often credited as being the creator of these stories, but of course he was not. And he was a great celebrity in his day for the Uncle Remus stories, which is, the subtext is, it's the happy Negro on the plantation who tells these charming little stories about animals and stuff.
Right.
Directly next door to the Wren's Nest is West Hunter Street Baptist Church, which is where it moved maybe in the 70s. But West Hunter Street was the church that Ralph David Abernathy came to lead when he moved to Atlanta in 1960. So literally next door to one another, you have the Wren's Nest and Ralph Abernathy's church. Mm-hmm. And all it would have took was for someone to stand on the sidewalk and just point to that juxtaposition.
Yes.
But that was never, that's just that was representative of I think it's fair to call it a failure of my education to make these kinds of connections. And it goes right through to the whole, the way in which we were taught history. What you were talking about, Southern history is reducible to the 4 years of the Confederacy. Mm-hmm. And then you skip from there, you go to Emancipation, the 13th Amendment, to World War I. And that entire history of Reconstruction, Jim Crow, all of that is completely passed over.
Right.
And where I felt like that became really troubling for me was because, and this is why your book resonated with me so deeply, is because American history is not something that happens in textbooks. It's a reality that we live right now. We are agents in this story.
Right.
And we are agents with histories. One of the sort of more shocking revelations I learned in my own version of kind of putting myself back together was that the motion to have 33 Black representatives in the Georgia legislature removed from the state assembly in 1868 originated with my great uncle. Mm-hmm. That was his idea. And so now it's not just a matter of learning more about American history. It's learning what it has to do with me. How that it's specifically, this line you have on this one page about all the spots and stops that led to me. For me, that's one of them. That's one of those that I was never, for understandable reasons, not taught. But and I'm still working out what all that means. I don't know. But this phenomenon you're describing about selective, or in my terms, it would be like selective amnesia, or a selective memory or deliberate amnesia. We choose to forget certain things that do not confirm our sort of a priori self-understanding or self-image.
Or what they really mean. I mean, I had the same experience in Montgomery because, as you know, the capital of the Confederacy, Montgomery, where Jefferson Davis was sworn in on the steps, with all the statues, is less than 2 minutes walk from the church.
Dexter Avenue, yeah.
Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Thank you. I was trying to not confuse the Birmingham Church with the Montgomery Church. Having done that round on my own. But from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church to the statue of Jefferson Davis is not a long journey. The Confederacy of the Civil Rights is a 2-minute walk.
Yeah. And that, again, like when we went on our first trip in 1997, we went to Montgomery, and of course, being sort of naive, I took the photograph of Jeff Davis on the steps and all of that. And it didn't occur to me until 21 years later when we went back to Montgomery, exactly what you just described. That, speaking of next door neighbors, like Joel Chandler Harris and West Hunter Street, Dexter Avenue and the state capitol are almost directly across the street from one another.
That's right.
And that's one of those things that you have to go there to experience that and feel that, the proximity of these histories. Maybe touches on something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is the psychological effort that white people like me and my family have put into forgetting those juxtapositions. It takes an awful lot of work to just pretend like those things aren't just right next door to one another.
I imagine it's very exhausting being a white Southerner.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, in a different way that it's exhausting for me being a black Southerner. I mean, but it's a different kind of exhaustion.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes from, I don't know, maybe we can talk about this a little bit later when we come back to what you talked about in your recent Bon Appetit piece, and it's a theme in your work, Black Joy, that is, it is exhausting trying to maintain lies. Like, trying to maintain a version of history and a version of yourself that is just untrue is spiritually exhausting. I mean, it's exhausting in every possible way. But yeah, I'm sure there is a kind of the type of exhaustion you experience as a black man in America is totally different than whatever it is I experience as at least as someone who's trying to kind of take this stuff, even if I weren't trying to take that, even if I were trying to pretend that this history didn't exist, that in itself would be exhausting. To try and just shield yourself. I want to come back to the text again, because I mean, not to spend too much time on page 11, but it's such a good page. And there's the next paragraph after the one I just read begins like this. My entire cooking life has been about memory. It's my most indispensable ingredient, so wherever I find it, I hoard it. I tell stories about people using food. I swap memories with people and create out of that conversation mnemonic feasts with this fallible, subjective mental evidence. Sometimes there are people long gone whose immortality is expressed in the pulp of trees also long gone and in our electronic ether. Other times there are people who converse with me as I cook, as the enslaved once cooked, testifying to people and places that only come alive again when they are remembered. And I don't know if this was intentional, but it's as you turn the page, this is on the top, this next sentence is on the top of the page. So it kind of hits you with this incredible force. In memory, there is resurrection. And thus the end goal of my cooking is just that, resurrection. Which is a much bigger goal than just saying we need to be better informed.
Yeah.
You're talking about, and maybe this is where I can mention the fact that, you are Jewish and also teach Judaic studies, and your cooking gene intertwines Jewish and African foodways, and your next book, I think, is going to do this even more, Kosher Soul. But so I want to ask you this, because you describe yourself as a culinary historian, a historic interpreter, and a food writer. I wonder if you would also accept the term theologian, or at least here, I'd like to hear you talk about this a little bit, that your work is, it seems to me, so deeply animated by a religious impulse. And the way you talk about food, you talk about it using, I think there's one term where you talk about it as a kind of sacrament. Yeah. You talk about food, you're talking about memory as, this book is aiming at resurrection. I mean, that's a about as deep a theological term as you could get. You even used Aristotle's word eudaimonia, at one point to talk, which has a rich tradition, a rich history in a number of religious traditions. So am I right to read The Cooking Gene as a work of theology?
First of all, I'd like to apologize to the white lady who complained in her review of the Audible version of my book that I mispronounced that word. Sorry, white lady. I didn't go to theology school, but I did know the word. So she's like, he mispronounced a lot of words. Actually, I just mispronounced that word. So thank you, nitpicking Becky. Or Karen. Sorry, she wasn't a Becky. She was Karen. No disrespect, white folks. Love you. But seriously, yeah, I think people are funny. They don't understand. They don't really get it. They don't get it. What I mean by they don't get it is that Black Americans have a very deep relationship with the Hebrew Bible. And yet I was raised by people who, of course, were raised Southern fundamentalists, the Black version. And beyond that. I mean, I know the white version too. I went to Southern Baptist Church when I was growing up for a small time, and Methodist. And I assure you that it's no different in Maryland than it is in Virginia, in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Tennessee. No difference, please. No difference. Same culture. And I understood what was not to be done was to be done. I think there is a separate Southern 10 Commandments. It's added on to the one in the book. But then again, a great, look at the people who I've admired. I mean, to say I admired Dr. King is cliche until I kind of got through the fact that he was about, much like Reverend Barber, he was about class. He was about so many different elements that aren't spoken of in the polite memory of Dr. King, right? He had a lot of revolutionary tendencies. They're all speaking the same language, but I mean, they come from an oratorical tradition that's rooted in the sermonizing. And one of my good friends said to me, he's a journalist, and he said to me, I was having so many problems getting this book out of my system. And he goes, I want you to whisper to me. I want you to talk to me. I want you to preach to me as if I'm sitting on the other side of the table from you. Do not regard this as a book, regard it as a conversation with your reader. And when he said that to me, it became so much easier, because then I was like, oh, I know how to talk my ass off. That's easy. I know how to talk to somebody and make them feel good about themselves, even while we're talking about their worst issues. I know how to talk to somebody and get them to, get to their truth. And I know how to bare my soul. So all that comes into it. I'm a great student of world religions. I love the skeleton structure of world religion that makes them tick. I'm less about, and I actually could care less about what bonds them. I know that's a big thing for people, but I already feel that and see it. That unity, I don't that's already in me. It's a wonder I didn't become a Unitarian. But I like Jewish food better. Their brisket isn't even pot roast. It's the roast beef from the deli. But, no disrespect, Unitarians, I love Unitarians. So, but that wasn't the issue. What makes them different? What makes them tick? What is their personality? What is the language they use to express the human condition? All that goes into the things I think about. I mean, I'm fascinated with every single, not just world religion, but individual spiritualities, different people, different peoples, ethnic groups, religious minorities really fascinate me. You only have 3,000 people, but you believe as though the entire universe depends on you, whether you have 3,000 or 3. That's and then of course there is that. I remember sitting in the Atlanta History Center where I've done a lot of programs, and one of the most cathartic experiences I had before I even began really delving into the book was sitting in the little room where they have all the different types of Southern sacred music. And that included 4 or 5 different sermonic traditions. And I could sit in that room all day, even though the tape's one tape going back and over again, because we have our own form of like meditation and healing and the relationship with words, of course. And then of course, I was really good at memory verses when I was growing up, and I still am, but I mean, it's not as much a Jewish thing. And by Jewish thing, I don't mean the culture of American Jews. I mean, the culture of Jewish learning. It's not the same. It's not the same. However, it did come in handy because, I grew up with what does the good book say about that? We was born to die. Yes, sir. What does the good book say about that? You spare the rod, you spoil the child. What does the good book say about that? I had 4 Black grandparents from the South. I heard what does the good book say about in one version or another multiple times. And if the minute you come across someone else who has that same cultural background or relationship to spirituality or religion, it's an immediate connection. Would I accept the label theologian? Give me another 30 years. Give me another 30 years. I'm not supposed to say I'm really wise until I'm 70. So past 70.
Well, I can say that's probably the wisest thing I've ever heard in the context of the label theologian. Give me 30 years. Well, I did. Yeah. So you're talking about scripture, and you write at the end, towards the end in this chapter, Sankofa, which I may be mispronouncing myself.
No, you got it. You got it right.
Okay. My entire life, I knew, and many others knew, that our daily bread was itself a kind of scripture of our origins, a taste track of our lives. It is a lie that food is just fuel. It has always had layers of meaning, and humans, for the most part, despise meaningless food.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a connection between treating food as fuel and treating human beings as simply instruments? or simply like thinking machines?
Yes, or working machines, or sexual machines, or consumers, or the consumed. Okay, so like someone originally, when I wrote my blog, or some article came out about me and said, food is fuel, nothing more. And if I really delve into who says comments like this on a regular basis, the other day ago, Andrew Zimmern, my buddy, put up a picture from my Instagram, which was a picture of some of the 10 ancestors I have pictures for that were born into slavery on Juneteenth. And all I said was, I'm honoring these people who wore the shoe, who actually saw this thing happen on this day. Never read the comments, scroll down, and this this guy says, enough already. No race is better than the other race. Don't focus on any race. Who asked you? Who the hell asked you to tell me to decenter myself when you do that every damn day? Every day. So, it just wheels back on itself when we talk about there's no meaning to this. Which means that, either you view history and the historical experience and its effect on our lives as revelatory, or you see it as randomness. And unfortunately, we have this hybrid in our common think that it has attached itself like a remora, like a barnacle, like a pestilence to the American civil religion. I mean, I hate to betray my understanding of Southern whiteness, which is not somewhere else. It's in my blood. That's a really odd truth, right? That trying to make the Confederacy part of the civil religion and trying to go between being very secular and very sacred about our identity is a very strange thing. I mean, when I saw one of my friends sent a picture from Pennsylvania of someone's license plate, the front, they don't have them in the front in Pennsylvania, and it had the Confederate flag blend with the American flag, and it said "All Lives Matter." And to me, that was almost like the dark side of some Middle Eastern religions, where you actually have to honor God and Satan, and you have to like, and it's not even like I have to kind of like give a little bit of ear time to the demonic or negative side, the night side, the moon side. And so I have to honor it as equal. And I've never really understood this. I don't vibe with that. But that's what it's like to me. It's like saying, here we have Jesus, here we have Damien, and they're gonna play. And I'm just like, no, that's not gonna end well for one of them. It's not gonna end well for us. So it's a big conflict in our culture, is that, do we want food to be fuel or memory? Do we want that's why I think meal prep is the most demonic thing ever. I'm so sorry, people who work out. I love you. But like the idea that someone eats the same shit every day because it's supposed to make them thinner, well, it ain't gonna work for me. It's like, that's not, I'm not passing on a tradition that way. I'm not honoring the memory that way. I mean, I could probably do my own Black heritage version, but I choose not to because I hate leftovers. But the point is that we don't know how to handle memory. And our food culture is interesting in America, because we talk about, people ask the question often, they say, well, what is American food? And I would say that American food on one level is this negotiation between, much like with the secular culture and the sacred mixed into the American civil religion. Those who don't know what I mean by American civil religion, it was a coined term to talk about the way in which Americans had constructed from the Revolutionary period to the Civil War to immigration, to post-immigration, a mythological concept of exceptionalism, of heroism, of in God we trust, and yet you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in certain religion, but in God we trust. Which God? Is it a man God? Is it a woman God? Is it, you know, these are important questions on a theological scale, right? Mm-hmm. We have to ask defined terms, Black's Law Dictionary style, right? And yep, no one does. They just say, put your hand over your heart. And then there's nothing else. It's just kind of like, okay, Thanksgiving, we eat this. We celebrate being American, whatever. We do this on Christmas. We do that. Wait a minute. But not everybody does Christmas. So what are we going to do about that? We, you know, all those, and then of course our military holidays, right? And our little wisp of class, Labor Day. It's the same thing. It's exact same like back and forth issue when it comes to our other food. You know, you can think of fast food and TV dinners as the secular and ethnic as the sacred. You can think of food substitutions. No, sorry. You can think of other food stuff as being part of this narrative of being traditional and time honored, our indigenous food, the food that came out of slavery, etc. But people don't know about that. They don't know about that scripture. They don't know what it means to people. They think it's just food. You know, it's hard because I have people writing at me talking about, well, why did you guys ditch Aunt Jemima, right? And I get my eyes start rolling. And I'm like, well, she was such a positive role model. No, Aunt Jemima's not a role model. Aunt Jemima is not real. Is not real. It's not a thing. It's like they don't know how to distinguish between a mythology created to assuage their guilt and a real American hero. If you want to know the story of a Black woman who transformed the world through her food, it's not going to be someone enslaved and captured on a box. You know, you don't know about Edna Lewis, and you don't know about Leah Chase, and you don't know about so many figures. I mean, I can't right now. I've got Rona brain. Lena Richard, who was on TV in New Orleans back in the 50s and 60s, right? In, you know, doing her cooking, and Princess Pamela. You know, Mama Dip, North Carolina. So many people, and like, I mean, we can keep going all day long. My good friend Sally Ann Robinson, who is, you know, not elderly to any extent, but is, you know, was one of the students that Pat Conroy taught, who is now like a master chef of the Gullah Geechee tradition. But like, you don't want to know about them because it gets too real too fast. But you want Aunt Jemima, you want Uncle Ben, which some guy said to me, well, I don't even understand why a Black man is on the cover of a box of a fundamentally Asian food product. Like, oh. I cannot with these people. Okay. And their sense of their idea that there is some sort of there's not one thing has nothing to do with the other. No, everything comes from something else. Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. You know, Kohelet taught us that because the derivative nature, the cycles that we go through are the most horrible thing about life, right? That we really are crazy, we really are going like this all the time, making these revolutions, but never being revolutionary. The same thing can be said with the food. I mean, right now we have food writers at war and at détente and burning things down because even food writing reflects the traumas of race in America and our struggles with race in America. Nothing is free of this. Not a damn inch of ground in this country. Not an inch of our mental space is free of this. No, you will never, just like COVID, you will never go back to a time when you were free of this. It's always going to be part of the memory of the society. And you will not get your white peace of mind back because it's convenient. I hate to tell you that. Not you personally, but the world that is pushing back against something that's not new. None of this is new. It just hasn't been blasted out like it has been today. Sorry about that. I had to tell some truth right now.
Well, since you brought up Aunt Jemima, I was going to ask you about her anyway. But one of the things that occurs to me about that is that the product that is labeled Aunt Jemima, I mean, with Aunt Jemima, the brand is a simulacrum of an enslaved woman. So is the product that label is attached to. I mean, Aunt Jemima syrup is not, it, barely resembles actual maple syrup or sorghum syrup or whatever.
It ain't none of them.
Yeah, all of them. So you have it's almost like it's almost like Aunt Jemima syrup is to real syrup what the lost cause is to actual history.
Thank you.
It's a manufactured simulacrum that makes us feel good that we're actually participating. But it's still pure. I mean, there's nothing nourishing about it. It is pure, both like in a physical sense, but also in a historical sense. It is. But anyway, you're talking about there's no going back.
No.
There's no going back to pretending like white supremacy, the legacy of race and slavery and mass incarceration and convict leasing and lynching. We can never go back, if we're honest with ourselves, to a time where we pretend that is not a part of who we are.
Right.
If we still believe in the we.
Right.
But if I read you rightly, you're saying that that's okay, because on the other side of this is actually something better. To live truthfully and honestly is better than living a fake existence and living believing untruths. And it's harder and it's inconvenient, especially if that has been the dominant story for 400 years, to suddenly have that overturned. But I think, and I'll end with this because I want to give some other people a chance to talk to you too. And this goes back to the passage at the very beginning of the book that I wanted to talk about, because your work it has this incredible combination of that prophetic sort of moment, that Jeremiah kind of biblical tradition. You are always, forcing us to look at realities that, especially for white people, is really challenging of the received narrative, forcing us to confront realities that we don't want to face, forcing us to remember things that we forgot. And at the same time, all of your work to me seems really driven by a profound generosity. And you have this paragraph at the end of the preface to The Cooking Gene, which I just want to read, and then we can talk about it and then open it up to everyone else. You say, "I dare to believe all Southerners are a family. We are not merely Native, European, and African. We are Middle Eastern and South Asian and East Asian and Latin American now. We're a dysfunctional family, but we are a family. We are unwitting inheritors of a story with many sins, that bears the fruit of the possibility of 10 times the redemption. One way is through reconnection with the culinary culture of the enslaved, our common ancestors, and restoring their names on the roots of the southern tree and the table those roots support.
Yeah. I still don't think I wrote that. I don't think I did, but it's weird. The passages that you pick out are the ones where I'm just like, damn, what was going on that day, you know? And by the way, I wrote this entire book at a Dunkin' Donuts. 4 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. Made one of my best friends, Crystal, at that table every day. And I got sick of donuts. So halfway through, I never ate another donut for like another 2. Not that that hurts me. It's great. But of course, I wasn't a Krispy Kreme. If I was a Krispy Kreme, I would have been rolled out of there. Because it's Krispy Kreme. I mean, Krispy Kreme is part of the Southern DNA. So yeah, here's the deal. It's not, I don't like kumbaya talk, and it's not a kumbaya paragraph. But what it is saying that, you know, I remind my audiences when I'm able to like be in front of them instead of this Rona life. And I remind them, look, if we did a rapid DNA test of the people in this room, y'all be shocked real fast. Because you would, I mean, everybody goes, oh, we're all related. That's a way to avoid some real stuff. Okay? Some real stuff. What do I mean by real stuff? I mean like the idea that people don't realize that there have been hundreds of moments in your life, if you live in a very populated area or have been to populated areas, where the person who stepped on your shoe or flicked you off or almost got you into a car accident, or I mean, let me go there, it's dangerous, that you dated but didn't have sex with, and probably that's good for the better, are people that are related to you probably within 6 or 7 generations, if not 5 or 3. And they don't have a color. They can be brown, they can be yellow. Look, when they did the show with Henry Louis Gates, Eva Longoria and Yo-Yo Ma were cousins. How the hell did that happen? Well, it's a fact. You don't have to ask me any further questions other than, if that is so, if that is true, if we know that there are Black families and white families that are connected, what does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, I look at people and go, don't you dare have a racist bone in your body because you're talking about your family. You know, that's a hard conversation to have. Mm-hmm. And I realize, like I said to you earlier, I said, when we go, you must be related, sometimes that recognition brings on the other stuff, but it's not like what people think. I know some people think, oh my God, I have this conversation and this Black person will blow up in a rage at me. No, actually not. Actually, that's refreshing to know that this person understands we have a connection. For the next couple 100 years, long after this conversation is forgotten, people will still have the DNA of enslaved Africans in white bodies and the DNA of white people in Black bodies and native blood, etc. In the same way that you can look at, I didn't know this, but I didn't realize that 20% of all Afrikaners, right? The descendants of the Dutch, the Germans, and the French who were in South Africa have significant African ancestry. And then I smacked myself and said, why does that surprise you when you living up in it? That's been your story. They had 300 years. You have 400. You've had much longer for that. It shouldn't be a surprise by now. And yes, I'm generous because I am opening the door to people who want to have the conversation on familial terms. But if they want to have the terms that are relying on old tropes, or they're going right on back to we should be separate, I'm sorry. You can segregate all you want. You can Bob Jones it all you like. It's too late, boo. We're connected, And this is not it's just a man conversation. It's a woman conversation, All too often, it's an only man conversation. It's not a mother-to-mother conversation. I guarantee you, if this was a mother-to-mother conversation about police violence and community violence, shit would have stopped a long time ago. But because it's men talking about this, and not mothers who when they lose a child, they all join a club that nobody wants to belong to, and that revolutionizes the world. Nothing has ever stopped in history that's negative that wasn't stopped by women. Men maintain garbage, unfortunately. But whenever you see women put their head together and make a move together, the nonsense stops. But this is, of course, a conversation that is 401 years old, longer than that. So I'm waiting for us to realize that we have to look at those family trees. We have to compare family stories. We have to sit with each other. I do not have to take anybody's bullshit. I don't owe nobody. And it's not, my hurt and my trauma are not debatable. Those are not debatable. I can listen to you and try to figure you out. I'm gonna tell you one last thing. I get it when I see white Southerners go, that's my heritage. I get it. It's almost like, it's like having what's that term they use in theology for a ritual atheist, right? He goes into the church because he likes the feeling of camaraderie and the cycle of the seasons and all that. But doesn't believe anything is being said. That's how I feel about this whole identity of white Southerners vis-a-vis the plantation, the elites, the working class, the yeoman farmer, and the Confederacy. I don't believe in it, but I understand why, because it gives white Southerners a sense of cohesion, and a reason to express grief over something they caused themselves. They held the wolf by the ears, not us. We were the wolf. We wanted to get the hell out. But now that we're in this moment in history and we've broken so many bricks out of this wall, it's time for a new conversation between white Southerners and Black Southerners, and beyond that with Native Southerners and Southerners of immigrant origin, beyond that historical time. It's time for us to really talk about what it means to be a Southerner. I often tell people that one of the most important things you can know about Southern people, myself included, is that a real Southerner is not about how much sugar you put in your tea. A real Southerner is not about how you speak. A real Southerner is not about what recipe you use or some stupid expression book that some Yankee wrote telling us how Southern speak. A real Southerner is someone who says, I am Southern first and American second. And that, for white Southerners and Black Southerners and beyond, has been a reality since the South began. We have a corporate, familial, tribal identity that comes. That's what people around the country don't understand. When they think that rebel flag entitles them to some celebratory whiteness, they don't get it. That they're not in the Southern family. It offends me. It offends me less when Billy Bob from Tennessee waves it than Mitch from Oregon. Mitch don't know what the hell he talking about. He ain't up in this. He ain't got no skin in the game. But we do. And we have knots to unravel. I do not want to be in a virtual or cold civil war for another 150 years. It's exhausting, right? Mm-hmm. So the best thing we can do is unravel that and get to understand it. Ever since, Charles Pickney and a couple other people said it. So the Southerner sees himself first as a Southerner and second as an American. And that may be very difficult for other people to hear, but that's the root of the problem on our side. But it's not a problem. You know, it's something to be navigated. That's not a problem. It's something to be navigated because that's how I see myself. I see myself as a Black man first and foremost. But when it comes to this side of the Atlantic identity, I am a Southern person first and an American person second because I have that history. Okay.
I'm going to open it up to everybody else. And while I'm doing that, I want to, so if you've got a question or unmute yourself and let us see your face. Everybody's got their cameras off, but I know, Michael, you love the experience of being in a room with other people and talking. And so don't hide, let us see you. And I mean, this is all about communion, I guess, fellowship. Sound like a Baptist now. While people are thinking about that, I just wanted to mention one thing. Where when you were talking about the genealogy part and how important it is for us to understand our family histories and to do that in a way that's kind of collaborative and make sense of if we have a common story, to make sense of that. I don't think he's still in the room, but one of the things that I'm going to be doing with Adam Copeland, who's an old friend of mine from high school, is a series of events through his theater company based in Atlanta, where we're going to do something like that, where we will have a conversation about family history and sort of what you learn, what kind of revelations, your discovery of your own hidden family history did for you and for your understanding of other people in the world. And Michael, I hope, I'm going to just put this out there now, I hope we can get you back for something like that in the future, because this is your life's work. And all right, I'm going to shut up. So does anybody have, feel free if you want to, if you're feeling bashful, but don't feel bashful. Question. I do want to acknowledge Stephen Krotz is in the room. I can't see you. I know you can see us, but glad to have Stephen here because Stephen did the illustrations. Oh, there you are. There's Stephen.
And beautifully.
So I got to call people by name to turn your cameras on. So Stephen did, were they woodcuts? Stephen?
They were pen and ink.
Pen and ink.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this, guys. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I want to tell everybody here who will watch this recording. I don't know what it was I saw of Stevens. We met down near Brattonsville, South Carolina, many years ago. I don't know what I saw. He's got to do the illustration for this book. You must. And I think I absolutely fell in love the day he did a picture of one of my ancestors who actually made the Middle Passage. And I could see my face and my family's journey in this man's face. And it was almost like he was a forensic anthropologist. You know, he brought the dead back to life. It was a total Lazarus moment. A total Lazarus moment. And he's just done. That's my plug, and it's an honest plug. You know. Yes.
Oh,
that's
nice.
it. That's it. Yeah, remarkable.
The mute is us, so you can put it back on mute. We don't need to be on.
I'd love to talk to you about Dunkin' Donuts at some point because I have a conflicted relationship to Dunkin' Donuts. You know, I feel a loyalty to Krispy Kreme.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to.
But when I was my family took a trip to Massachusetts last summer, and I tell you, I have a new appreciation for Dunkin' Donuts. They're like, it's a different thing, and it's got this religious devotion in the Northeast.
Yeah, it's a whole other ball game. We have our Krispy Kreme scattered around this area, but they tend to be in rather hoity-toity areas. When you get to the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, they're considered. I'll never forget that when I went to London and I went to Harrods, and I saw the most expensive Krispy Kreme donut I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the thing was $8 for one Krispy Kreme donut in Harrods, a food section. They thought it was gourmet food. I kid you not. I was like, wow, what is up with the British? Is the food so bad that y'all think Krispy Kreme is the jam? Okay, I don't know. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Yeah. I want to say one quick word about food. Food for food's sake. I have to tell you that I kind of miss the lizard thicket, and I kind of miss meat in three places. And because that's not a thing here. And it's less, but it's just not a. I mean, you got to go deep into Virginia for one of those, and you got to go down 85 a bit in North Carolina before you get to one. But when you get to one, it is taking someone who is not from the South or from here to one of those spaces is really hilarious, because you have to explain to them why Jell-O is a salad. It's like, why? What is this nonsense? Which I avoid. I do not eat the Jell-O salads, but now I'm in love with the fact that we have all these fresh and wonderful things, but being able to tell the stories about these foods beyond just that American context of this was just here, like the okra, like the black-eyed peas, etc., has been wonderful for me. It's been healing. I think people need to realize these are healing things for us to have our memories back. And then you go to West Africa, and I've said this to other people, but you go to West Africa, you go to the market, and if you are a white Southerner and you go to the market what is the other place in London? Begins with a B, Borough Market. And you look around, you go, okay, this is okay. But then you go to Nigeria, and it's all hot peppers, tomatoes, watermelons, black-eyed peas, rice, corn, on and on and on. And you're just like, uh-oh, where am I actually rooted? I mean, I would actually love to take a trip to Ghana and Nigeria and to Senegal, with a handful of my chefs that have been with me and show a group of 20 white Southerners their African heritage, and I think their mouths would drop and how connected they would be to those folks.
One of the things that really struck me in the cooking gene was, cassava is like a really trendy thing. Now that there's a ton of options for like gluten-free flours. Cassava flour is one of them. But you talk about cassava as being like, this is not a new, we kind of think of it like it's a new ingredient, but this has been around forever.
Cassava, palm oil. And what I wanted to stress was that, some people immediately say, well, the peanuts were from America, chilies were from America. But that wasn't the experience of the people who were living in West Africa. By the time my ancestors came to America in earnest, which was the first half of the 18th century, into bleeding over into the next part of the 18th century, those things had been foods in Africa for 200 plus years. If you think that's an eternity to you and me, imagine what it's like to someone who doesn't have a clock on the wall. People don't think about that. And by that time, Africans, agrarian Africans had already developed on their own varieties of those same plants that looked nothing like the ones that originally came over. They didn't just plant the seed in the ground and it was the same seed. They were amateur botanists, much like the people who these plants came from. And they'd already incorporated them to their diet to the point where they knew what to do with them. They were not strangers to corn or to peanuts or all those other foods. So I drove that home, and I also drove home the idea. The reason why I wrote it the way I did, kind of in a meandering way, and people should really hear this, is because, I can't tell you more than 10, 15 details, if that, about the life of any of my ancestors. What I can tell you about is the world around them, how much they cost if I have a record of that. Well, just think about the horror of that phrase, how much they cost. I can tell you about the people who were in their community nearby, how they describe the world of my ancestors, etc. South London, yes, I see the comment. I went to Electric Avenue, made famous by the song in Brixton. And I went to some of the Trinidadian Jamaican neighborhoods, and then on the other side, in Southeast London as well. And I one of the pictures that I took, I was just like, oh my God, they got sweet potatoes, they got collard greens. and then not to be outdone, guys, when I was in Dublin, across from the little farmers, well, whatever it was, Green Market, there was the only 2 black shops in Dublin. One was the West Indian African grocery.
Ooh, that market.
And the other one was, how do I describe this in a polite way? It was the only shop in Dublin where women of my background with a certain shape and stature could obtain jeans that worked for their bodies. So and the hilarious part was they had a portrait of Barack Obama above a dummy of these booty jeans that they had in the market. I was cringing, and yet I was celebrating. It was wonderful. But like to see that presence was there. But you'll notice that in the cooking gene, I did not let the British off the hook. What's up, North Carolina? I see you. So, yeah. Oh, since Zek is here, when I was finishing up, I wrote at his house in Huntersville, and I think everybody should know that I had 2 very well-meaning friends in North Carolina, in Concord and Huntersville, and I had to finish the book there, rapid fashion, after struggling at Dunkin' Donuts. So it's real writing a 400+ page book. Not that many of those on Black food history.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes. Hey.
Hi. It occurs to me after listening to you that I have been cooking Punjabi food and Moroccan food and Israeli food, but I have never cooked African or West African food. The food from the area that I'm from, that my ancestors, are there any cookbooks or anything that you can recommend that get me into that?
There's a really great one by a lady named Rosamund Grant. It's called Taste of Africa. Rosamund Grant. And the reason why I suggested it is, and don't get I'll have to send Pete the information because there's 2 versions of this book. One of them incorporates a lot more North African and Middle Eastern, which is okay. but it kind of obfuscates some of the really good recipes she has in there from sub-Saharan Africa. And I say that because one of the challenges has always been making an African cookbook that you could make in, let's say, in England or in America, because you don't have all the ingredients. And when you go to West Africa, you see exactly what I mean. But most of the ingredients, I would say, that are missing from those books. What's a nice way to say this? They're the things that most Americans wouldn't eat. Like is locust bean paste. It's fermented. And there's yet in Senegal, which is like, how to describe yet? Yet is like an oyster or a mollusk. Now, most people would say you don't take a conch or an oyster and let it sit out in tropical heat. Well, in Senegal, they do. And what they do with it is they let it get really, really, really dried by the sun, which it putrefies a little bit, and they bury it in the sand. Then they wipe that off and let it ferment some more. And then, the same way that Thai people or Vietnamese people use fish sauce, they use bits of yet. Well, you could just do that by using fish sauce and skip that whole dried oyster in the hot sun thing in the tropics. For real. But a lot of these cookbooks simply didn't, I remember looking at some of the cookbooks that were from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it takes to like the mid 70s for somebody to say, oh, you can go buy a fresh knob of ginger. Because before then it was always powdered. Some people didn't have fresh garlic. But, and then they boil down to garlic, hot pepper, ginger, black pepper. But we both know that the West African spice palette is way beyond that. So that's there. That's why. So Rosamund Grant is good. Dorinda Hafner is also good. Dorinda Hafner. We might have to go to A-Book or Libris to get these books. Some are not in print. Then there's a beautiful book by a lady named Zoe, something or other, young woman about Ghana, which I highly recommend. And there's some Nigerian books coming out by Nigerian Americans in the next couple of months. Watch out for. But yeah, one more. Senegal by Pierre Cham, Phiam Cham. He has two good, Senegal and Yolele. And Senegalese food is very, very, very much like Low Country food. It's very much like Louisiana Creole food.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
I was muted. If I can, I'll get those specific citations and additions from you at some point, and I'll share those with everybody.
Cool.
If it's now 1:30, I'm just conscious of the time it's flown by. But you mentioned in the next couple of months there's some other books coming out, but you yourself are wrapping up 2 books right now.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what we can look for from you?
From UNC Press, out of Chapel Hill, I have the final cookbook in the Savor the South series. It's on rice. 50 some recipes. They're always small, manageable cookbooks that are single ingredient focused. Kosher Soul is of course about my relationship to Judaism and also the culinary journey of Black Jews, Jews of African descent in the Americas, particularly the South and the East Coast. And it's much like this one, part memoir, part food history, and part recipes, part cookbook. More recipes this time around. I'm not doing a separate cookbook. Nope. It's already gonna be difficult enough to incorporate these and make them shine and make this all work together. So that's what I'm doing with Kosher Soul. It's part of a trilogy. The next book after that is going to be about what it means to be a gay person, particularly a gay man in the kitchen. What that means for people. And the reason why I even said that is because I want people to understand that when I first started doing food writing, I wanted to bring my unique perspective but much like you've heard about with Bon Appetit and other publishers, I wasn't allowed to. I was told basically, nah, you ain't doing that. Why not? Because no one's ever heard of it. You know, isn't that some nonsense? We want diversity. We want different voices, stories, but we just don't want yours. Crude. Absolutely crude. You know, it just, and it's crude because I think the people who said that, no, I don't think, I know. They probably think of themselves as very well-meaning, open, tolerant, liberal people. But it's the fact that one publisher in particular, one editor at a publishing house said to me, America's not ready for you. Set me on the warpath, because I was just like, you know what? If America's not ready for me, you know, then hey, my people were here waving your people in off of Ellis Island. What do you mean America? Whose America is this? You're not America, you know? But just that idea that we have stories that, but we say we want diversity in food writing. We just don't want Black stories. We don't want gay stories. We don't want Black people who are not in a bubble. You know, I understand why certain writers, I'm not gonna say any names, I don't want to get no nonsense, but I understand why certain authors have caught more attention because they have that story that people seem to, other people outside of our community seem to love about us. Oh, he was saved from a life of crime and life on the streets when he picked up a skillet and his Baptist grandmother sat on the porch and blessed him and kept him from a life of drugs and crime and guns. Lord have mercy. He makes some good biscuits. Shut the hell up. That is not every Black boy's narrative. Some of us are autodidacts and some of us are queenie as hell and some of us are not Christian and you're looking at him. Sorry. Complicate your narrative. It doesn't make me any, but yet I uphold these other mainstream narratives. I can do both. I can walk and whistle at the same time. Although I prefer not to, because my Alabama grandmother told me if you whistle, you attract the devil, and that ain't good. You know. So I tell other people who are complicated. You know, it's complicated for even people to have like these commonplace narratives. And plus, you know, I hate to say this, but the New York publishing scene does not understand Southern people. I don't care what kind of Southern people they are. They don't understand. They do not understand Southern narratives, Southern places. They have this Dukes of Hazzard, Moonlights and Magnolias, fantasy in their head. And it really, I've heard this from other Southern writers of all backgrounds. Like, they don't get us. So be warned, Southerners who want to get published in the New York scene. You got to explain yourself to them.
Well, whatever they think about your work in New York, I think I can speak for everybody in this room. I am so grateful for you for writing The Cooking Gene and what you keep putting out. And I'm really looking forward to Kosher Soul, the book on rice. I have personally been changed by your writing.
Thank you.
And I am grateful to you for that.
Thank you, sir.
And if there's a rare person in this room that has not read The Cooking Gene, I kind of urge you strongly enough to do so. I put some links in the chat there to how you can follow Michael on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and afroculinaria.com. And then thecookinggene.com. And then, of course, please follow us at A Deeper South as well. This has been a feast, Michael, and I'm going to be belly full for a while. But this was an incredibly rich conversation about a lot of things, and I think you've given us so much to think about and reflect on. I really hope we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. I would love to.
And I just want to thank you for being here and thank the rest of you for being here from all the way over in London and around the country. So thank you. We will see you all soon.
Thank you very much. Bye, y'all.